I'm Daniel James, and you're listening to 7am. In Australian politics, access can be bought, factions can operate beyond public view, and conduct can be deeply troubling without ever meeting the definition of corruption. None of this is especially new, and maybe that's the problem. Meanwhile, people are becoming more disconnected from the institutions that shape their lives and less convinced those same institutions are working in their interests. Today, columnist for The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, Sean Kelly, on the money, secrecy and private power shaping our politics, and what happens when voters stop trusting the system itself. It's Saturday, August 8. Sean, great to see you again. Over the past few weeks, we've seen private political fundraisers paying to have dinner with the Prime Minister.
What about this dinner at Point Piper?
I attend lots of functions in
Why
lots
don't you want
of
to
places.
answer that?
Well,
We've seen a premier fall over corruption in the construction sector.
I've made the difficult decision to step aside as leader of the Victorian State Parliamentary Labor Party and as Premier of Victoria.
And an ICAC inquiry into a secretive Liberal faction.
Christian Ellis, Jeremy Greenwood, Robert Asaf and Jean-Claude Perrottet solicited or accepted political donations, including from prohibited donors, in amounts...
What connects these stories in your view?
Well, I mean, the first caveat to put on this is that we, of course, don't know all of the details, and some of these things are more still in the realm of allegation rather than proven fact. But there is a general theme, which is the impression that people have that money plays an enormous role in politics, that people who want to make money, who want to make great deals of money often, who are desperate to make money, will find a way either to influence politicians or to attempt to influence politicians. Those methods of attempting to influence the political class can take many different forms, but the first important point about them is that money is involved, and the second important point to note is that secrecy plays a very large role.
How much of this problem or perceptions around these problems is that most of this stuff, if not all of it, is entirely legal and routine? It might be serious and concerning, it might not pass the much vaunted pub test, but it's not necessarily illegal, it's not even necessarily classified as corruption.
Right. I think this is a huge problem. I think it borders on absurdity. So the thing that I always come back to is that it is commonly accepted in the political class that you can pay $10,000 to have dinner with anyone you care to name, really. You can have access, private access to the most powerful people in the country if you're willing to pay $10,000. That gets you a dinner. That is an insane fact. Now, This is on some level a product of the fact that political parties need to raise money without public funding for elections, which a lot of people are opposed to. You are always going to have to raise money in some way, but nonetheless, I think it is really striking. Now, that doesn't mean that what we're talking about here is bribery. It doesn't mean that somebody pays $10,000 and they get an outcome. But it does mean if politicians go to enough of these types of events, and they have dinners at private mansions, they begin to swim in the same waters. They hear similar arguments from a similar group of people or a group of people with similar interests along a very long period of time through their careers. That is going to change the way you see the world, or at least make it very, very difficult to hang on to the way that you originally saw the world. And that's the point. That is absolutely the point.
The most recent example, I guess, is the $10,000 dinner that the Prime Minister had at Point Piper, which, as you've indicated, is pretty common practice across all political parties. What can you tell us about this dinner and the guest list?
Well, the first thing to say is that there's some debate about exactly the amounts of money involved. The people who were there include Matt Comyn, the CEO of Commonwealth Bank and arguably the most influential CEO in the country right now, David Murray, the former chair of the Future Fund, also a CEO once upon a time of Commonwealth Bank, former Premier Daniel Andrews of Victoria. It was a pretty impressive guest list. And look, a lot of this it's not so much shadowy as vague. I would characterize it more as a type of aesthetic that governs politics in the eyes of most people. The art historian, T.J. Clark, he wrote this article about politics, and he says the politicians' language repels scrutiny. We have got to the point where we know that they have become so effective at using language that uses a whole lot of words, but in the end doesn't mean an enormous amount. And so we can't ask politicians questions and get answers. And at the same time, we know that they're operating in this world in which money flows freely, but we don't have much access to it. And then there's this third element, which is present in each of the stories you mentioned, which is the operation of factions in politics. Factions are always going to be involved in politics. They are, at their base, just a group of people who are working together to try to use the power that lies in numbers, and that is absolutely legitimate. The difficulty, of course, is that once upon a time, factions were about beliefs and ideologies, and over time, they've become mostly about power and promotion. And those three things, if you like, the language that politicians use to repel us, the secrecy around the internal operations of political parties, and the secrecy around the way that political parties interact with moneyed interests, all form a kind of whole where we are not allowed to see inside the workings of politics.
And it's kind of like the secrecy then breeds into this narrative that once the secrets are exposed, it then becomes scandalous, and that makes the whole body politic even look more dodgy in the eyes of the public.
It does, absolutely. The thing about this dinner that Anthony Albanese held with Felix Lee, there's nothing obviously wrong about it, but it has these little hints. It has a hint of alleged murkiness because Felix Lee's father, Philip Lee, there were questions around the movements of large amounts of money from China into Australia. There was a little hint of glamour because he apparently put $2.2 billion through Star Casino. These make it a kind of more exciting story. But the truth is that type of thing is happening all the time. And so it's become the case that only when you have these other added elements does it become a news story. And that points to the ordinariness of the problem. It points to the systemic nature of the problem.
Still to come, the factions shaping politics behind closed doors. Sean, you mentioned factions. ICAC has exposed the inner workings of a secretive Liberal faction, while Labor's National Conference showed how tightly factional deals can control what actually happens publicly. What have you noticed about the evolving nature of factional power and how it's being used in politics now?
Look, many years ago, before I worked directly in politics, I went to an event, and I think, perhaps ironically, it was a fundraiser. And Gough Whitlam was there. And it was the only conversation I ever had with him. He was very old and I was very young. And he said to me, factions are killing the party. Once upon a time, there was a division between factions, and it was about their view of politics and their view of the world. And so within the Labor Party, you had the left-wing faction pushing for a more left-wing view of the world. It was pushing, not in a pure sense, but for a kind of socialist view of the way things should be. And then there was the right wing of the party, which had a more pragmatic view of politics, perhaps a more conservative view of the economy, and they would battle it out. And that battle for principle, that battle for different views of the world has, with time, been lost. It is widely said the factions have turned into vehicles for promotion. They've turned into vehicles for careers. This is why I come back to this question of the aesthetic. So ordinary Australians aren't paying attention to this dinner that Anthony Albanese had, and they're not paying attention to the fundraisers that all of the political parties have. But they are getting an overall sense of politics. They're getting an overall sense of politics that opens the door for somebody like Donald Trump to come in, that opens the door for somebody like Pauline Hanson to come in, which is ironic because Pauline Hanson, we know, is absolutely tied up with Gina Rinehart. There's no purity on behalf of one nation here, quite the opposite. But how do ordinary people navigate through politics? It's a matter of glancing every now and then at the news, the overall sense you have the aesthetic. And the sense is that Donald Trump and Pauline Hanson, they are not trying to repel meaning. In fact, they're often giving you a very, very good sense of what they stand for and what they want to do. And so even though they are absolutely tied up with money as much as anybody else, there is this sense that they are immune from the overall operation of influence and elites in this country and every other country. To a fairly large extent, that is on the major political parties for allowing that impression to grow over time.
And that impression makes them seem more authentic, and therein lies the political opportunity for the populist right and other populist movements.
Exactly.
Sean, we're often told Australians need a better understanding of how democracy and its institutions work. How much does that matter when people don't believe those institutions are even working for them in the first place?
Right. I mean, this is absolutely the nub of the problem. So there were these two interesting facts that came out over the last fortnight. One was a survey from the Reserve Bank of Australia that was about trust in the bank and understanding of the bank. And Australians, about half of Australians really do not understand or misunderstand the relationship between interest rates and inflation, the relationship between interest rates and economic activity, which is remarkable considering how much of our public debate that's consumed over the last few years.
And how much it affects people's lives.
Exactly. We know that people's trust in institutions, in democracy, has been declining. The Reserve Bank's own survey of trust shows, I think the average was 5.5 out of 10. And I think this means that there is the potential for people's approach, attitude to institutions and the way we are governed to really spiral. The problem has been that politics for several decades now has moved too far in the direction of giving advantage to those who already have advantage. There is a sense that governments have become adrift from voters, and that is a substantive sense in the quality of lives that people feel they are able to lead and the quality of ambitions that people feel they are able to have. That is what governments need to address first and foremost, but you cannot separate that from the influence, perceived and actual, that people with great deals of money, businesses with great deals of power have on our politics.
And finally, Sean, to all of this, has the political class actually come to rely on the community's ignorance of how our democratic institutions and systems work in order to exploit that lack of knowledge and create a world for themselves where they can get away with this type of thing without proper scrutiny?
Look, it's a good question, Daniel. It's a complex one. I don't want to say any of these things are quite that conscious, are quite that deliberate. I think what happens instead is that a set of assumptions grow up over time. Political parties need to raise money. They get in an arms race. They have to win elections. They try to find the most effective ways of raising money. They fall into these habits. They end up mixing with a certain class of people, a certain type of very powerful business. Those things over time reshape the assumptions of politicians. They reshape the assumptions of how politics is done. All of this is fairly organic. Nobody is setting out to create this system, but that is why it is so hard to unpick. And I should add, Labor has made some moves over the past couple of years to change some of the laws around donations. We will have something that is closer to real-time donation disclosure. There have been various caps placed. In the main part, while these things could go further, these are good things. They are some significant changes. Whether they make a really significant difference to our politics over time, obviously we will only be able to tell as we see the operation of those laws, which kick in earnest next year.
Well, dear listener, if you haven't subscribed to 7am's Instagram or YouTube channel, please do, just to check out Sean's wonderful jumper. Sean, thank you for joining us once again.
Thanks very much, Daniel.
Seven AM is a daily show from Solstice Media. It's made by Atticus Bastow, Chris Dengate, Crystal Colour, Renee Auckland, Ruby Jones, Travis Evans, Zoltan Fetcho, and me, Daniel James. Our theme music is by Ned Beckley and Josh Hogan of Envelope Audio. And if you'd like to support 7am and bringing you the news independently without fear or favour, please follow the show on your chosen podcast platform and on our social media accounts. on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. Have yourself a great weekend.